Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really interesting young lady to introduce you tonight. Laura Babcock is her name. She's a communications expert. She provides strategic advice as president of Power Group Communications. She's been a CBC reporter. She's been the executive director of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce, where I ran into her first, and she's been very involved in politics in a nonpartisan way, commentating, and she's currently the host of the O Show, a current affairs podcast. Laura Babcock, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. So, where do you think Canada is, Ontario is, the Greater Toronto Area is, starting 2025? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Give me a sense of your attitude as we start 2025.
It's going to be tumultuous and transformative. And I say that because we are facing massive changes in our political landscape. Having Trump come into office is going to intersect with Canadian and provincial politics, and it's going to be unwieldy. And as we've already seen, it's going to take up a lot of our time. All of our political leaders are going to have to be very engaged in how we engage with our neighbors to the south, and nobody knows what to expect. So that sort of throws a curveball into the Canadian norms, especially when we look at the comments that were made over the holidays by Trump on social media, and whether that's just trolling or whether those are serious talks about manifest destiny and annexing Canada as the 51st state. It represents as an unprecedented experience for our country, at least in the last 50, 60 years. So we have to understand how to work together as a country. So national unity is going to be a huge conversation in the country as we go forward. Also, what does a political landscape nationally do for Ontario? Right now, we're seeing a tremendous amount of chaos. This year will be a defining week, or rather this week will be a defining week in how the year gets kicked off in terms of politics in Ottawa. And so that's going to have huge impact, whether or not we see a Poilievre PC majority probably, or minority. What we see happen with Trudeau's decision, whether he resigns, prorogues Parliament, whether there's a leadership race, a clash of the titans between Chrystia Freeland and probably the former head of the UK bank, might present an option for Canadians who are looking for someone who can help fix the economy. So there's going to be a huge battle for Liberal leadership if Trudeau, in fact, decides he's not going to be the candidate in the next election. So that's going to be huge. And it's going to be conversations around immigration and the economy and the carbon tax and how we integrate with the US and Trump's tariff threats. And so we have a federal conversation that is really, really wild. I've been following politics, as you mentioned, for a very long time. Never seen it so intriguing at the national level as it is at this moment. There have been other, moments, but considering Trump and everything that's going on, I think this is the most exciting and also precarious time for federal politics in Canada in a very long time. And I say this having grown up in Quebec and gone through, one of the giant votes for Quebec to separate. So I have some of the scars of that, Brian. So I understand what separation from Canada looks like and all of those kind of things. So I think we're coming into a very tumultuous year, and that will affect Ontario, of course. And whether or not Ford calls an early election is dependent on what happens with Poilievre federally. Some think Ford wants the federal gig. And so what does that all look like? The foreign interference inquiry results, what will that do to impact? And if there is an early Ontario election, is Bonnie Crombie ready to go with the Liberals to challenge Ford? Is it going to have to be an alliance of the left? Is it going to be merit? I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. And so it's going to be tumultuous. It's also, though, going to be transformative, because the status quo, whether it's in politics or business, is not going to be okay anymore. I mean, business communications are changing, public relations is changing, the advent of AI is changing how we're doing everything. People need to get very, very good at micro communication, short form video. They have to get very good at social. They have to get very good at hybrid solutions. So it's going to be a transformative year in terms of what we can achieve together, but it's also going to be tumultuous. And economically, I'm not optimistic, because usually, markets prefer stability than the kind of chaos that we have coming. But I do think we will come out of it leaner and stronger as a nation and as a business community. We're going to have to.
We're going to have to. Otherwise, it's going to be a big crisis
Absolutely.
in addition to being tumultuous.
Yep. And I work in crisis communication, as you know, and crisis communication has changed, because it used to be back in the day, if I'd get a phone call from a client or a new client, a company that's dealing with something, they'd talk to their lawyers, realize they need a communication strategy internally or externally. We would have a little bit of time to really kind of say, okay, we got to get on this within a couple of hours, but a couple of hours was a long time compared to where we are now. Now with social media, the horse is out of the barn. And a lot of companies and a lot of politicians don't even know how to ride the horse. So what I find myself doing a lot of training on is going in and talking to CEOs, talking to, in a nonpartisan way, people who are in the public sphere, and saying to them, how are you, what is your message? How is it quick and easy to understand, to replicate, to dominate? And how do you pivot to strength when there's a crisis? How do you respond to PR? I mean, you can't play in the deep, fast moving waters and then, not know how to surf when the big wave comes. I mean, so what I find is that a lot of companies are kind of saying, oh, do we really want to do social? Do we really need a podcast? Do we really need to understand all this micro stuff? Blah, blah, blah. Let's just do what we've always been doing. But, oh yeah, make sure people out there, our customers, know what we're selling or know what our messaging is or know what our values are. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to have a public facing organization, if you're going to be involved in public campaigns or a lot of the important social campaigns that customers are requiring of businesses now, they want to see social responsibility in the companies they choose. They want to see CEO and employee activism. And so if you're going to be doing it, you have to be able to not only do it proactively and consistently and effectively, but you've got to be able to respond quickly and effectively. And so what I'm seeing a lot of is a lack of crisis response in public relations in terms of war room speed. I'm seeing a lot of politicians who simply don't understand how to use social media. For instance, there might be a clip that I put out from the O Show or a comment that I put out on social that gets more traction than something that one of the major campaign leaders puts out. And so what you're finding is a lot of social media influencers like myself are carrying or challenging or amplifying messages for political campaigns because of our own sense of ethics and social justice and our own concerns with more effectiveness than you're even seeing coming out of these campaigns. So I'm watching political campaigns, and with the exception of Pierre Poilievre, and I'll give him credit on this, although I don't agree with a lot of his positions and policies, they understood this. They got on it 2 years ago. This constant flooding of the zone with micro content, with doing new media content. I mean, it's a juggernaut campaign coming out of the Conservative Party nationally. A lot of it, I think, influenced by US conservatives and the MAGA movement, but it works. And we're seeing other politicians trying to do tactics from 5 years ago, and they're not breaking through. Nobody's hearing them. So, we're seeing candidates like Bonnie Crombie, for instance. I don't know if there's a relation, Brian, but Bonnie, was seen as being possibly the rebuild of the Ontario Liberal Party, an option, an alternative to Ford after 6 years and a lot of scandal. And I would argue mismanagement of our tax dollar. And before she even got out the gate, Ford flooded the zone with new media messaging and advertising online that defined her, right? Before the public even got to know her. And so it's like, where is the Crombie campaign in this space? It's not secondary to fundraising. It's not secondary to rallies or meetings. It is primary. It is what generates all of that interest and support and engagement in 2025. We might not like it that Elon Musk has turned Twitter X into a mess, but it is the #1 news source on the planet. It is a juggernaut. And if we're not part of that, if we're not in all these platforms doing micro content, and whether we're politicians or businesses, then we're going to be left behind. And we're going to lose, whatever market share or customer base or political influence that we once had. So what I'm passionate about it, because the answers are there. The tools are readily available. In some ways, they're cheaper than they've ever been. and yet people don't know how to use them or are reticent to use them or prefer that they don't have to use them. But that's what's going to turn this into a crisis, Brian, from just tumultuous. If we as a country can't figure out how to respond rapidly and effectively to global changes in opinion of Canada, to Trump's campaign of besmirching our country and making us look vulnerable to takeover and to annexation. I mean, if we're not fast as a country on protecting our unity and protecting our economy and protecting our resources and getting politicians in place who know how to play in 2025, we're in trouble. So, I don't want to be a downer, but I am a communications expert watching, and I'm watching some of the good guys getting lapped.
So flying down to Mar-a-Lago and having dinner was not the right strategy?
No, it wasn't the right strategy. Now the Italian prime minister apparently has done same and is working on her close relationship with Trump. And some people are going to choose to do that. But in the case of being bullied by him, that looks like subservience. I'm a big fan of US political strategists, even ones whose politics I might not have agreed with in the past, because they understand their system. And they are all talking about how that was a huge mistake, that basically said to Trump, Canada will be your whipping post. We'll show up immediately. We'll do whatever you need us to do. Just don't be mad at us. Just don't threaten us. Just, let's work out a deal. Trump's the kind of person that respects strength, right?
So was Ford's strategy of threatening to cut off 1.5 million Michigan homes from power the right strategy then?
Well, I think it might have been if he also wasn't sort of emotionally blubbering about the fact that he felt betrayed because he thought he was like family with Trump. I mean, he looked weird. It was a weird moment for him. So no, it didn't look strong. And cutting off power to Michigan, is it a threat he can back up? I mean, at the very same time that he's saying this, he just gave a huge deal, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, to Elon Musk for internet service across Ontario. So if you don't see Elon and Trump as tied to the hip, I mean, how can you talk tough to one of them and be giving internet deals to the other one? I mean,
So if you were advising either Ford or Trudeau right now, what would you tell them to do?
Get a message and hammer the hell out of it and let Trump know that not only are you fast to respond, but you're not going to take his shit. I mean,
so the Mexican
pardon my language.
The Mexican president did.
Right.
Took
Absolutely.
a very hard
the mayor of Panama did. The mayor of Panama wrote a better statement to Donald Trump about his threat around the Panama Canal than our prime minister did, our premier did, half of the premiers across the country did. He basically said, if you continue to bully us, you will only serve to unite the Panamanian people. We will sit and talk and negotiate with you as good partners do, but we will not move an inch on your demands. You will not take an inch of our sovereignty. I mean, that came out of, I think, the mayor of Panama. So the Mexican president was first and strong in her response to Trump and setting the record straight. The mayor of Panama was. If Canada is going to say, okay, we'll run down there, we'll pretend we're going to be buddy partners, we'll threaten some tariffs, but then we're disjointed across the country in terms of a national unity strategy around that. You got different premiers bailing on that concept. It looks like Canada is divided. Trump is exploiting that division magnificently. And so that destabilization is going to threaten Trudeau's options. Obviously, it's going to threaten Canadian unity response to a foreign threat like we're getting. And, if they came out and said, respectfully, you're an important trading partner. We were the largest trading partner to the US, and I think until recently, I think now it's Mexico or China, but we were the biggest. Loyal neighbors, friends and family, we should be working together extremely well. And we are a sovereign nation. We are united, and we are not going to step down in any way. Don't mention the 51st state again. It's disrespectful to our sovereign nation.
It's incredibly disrespectful. And
have you heard Trudeau say that? Have you heard Trudeau say that? Have you heard Poilievre say that?
No.
Poilievre talked about the fact that, Canada, whatever, I watched the whole Peterson thing, but I didn't hear a clear, strong, you know what, back up, buddy. We're not intimidated.
I went to an interesting speech by David Frum, who, is a Canadian, but wrote speeches for a former Republican president.
For Bush, yeah.
And has been very negative about Trump. And his keynote speech in Toronto said, people in Canada are going to want to make use of this situation for political advantage, but that's the wrong strategy. If there was ever a time to have Team Canada, for everyone to come together in a unified kind of position, this is it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll be a real problem for Canada. No
100%.
one's done
Yeah.
that. No one's followed his advice.
And you know what I heard from on a pod in the U.S. just the other morning, and he has taken a full fight back stance, and the host was like, "Thank you for staying in the fight," and he said, I won't use his salty language because this is a radio program, but he said, we can't let the uppers win, and the host said, "Haven't we already?" And he said, "No, they think they have." So Frum is taking the position, having got a lot more experience with U.S. politics. He understands what's going on in the US. And he is saying to Canada, stand up, be united, strong and free. This is the moment. This is the moment. I had actually Matthew Dowd, another political strategist who worked actually on the Bush-Cheney campaign. He was on my show recently. And this is actually before Trump won. And he said that, Canada has to realize that our democracy is at risk. And the US didn't think it could happen to them. They did not think that their small L liberalism was at risk, or that their ability to keep in place their structures of their democracy were at risk. They thought they were impervious to it. And, they found out too late, haven't they? I mean, we now have a US president going into office with Caesar-like powers because the Supreme Court has said that nothing he does is illegal. So we are in a huge destabilizing, world-changing moment in however many days till January 20th. And we have to realize that as a country, as Canada, we're completely vulnerable from a point of view of military power, but we're strong in terms of trade power. We're strong in terms of our brand internationally. We have a tremendous amount of respect at international tables. We lead in some international metrics that matter. We have internal problems. We have, I would argue the Poilievre campaign has been stirring a lot of division, and successfully so. They're exploiting it as I think is probably what Frum was talking about. It can easily be exploited. We have Canadian media personalities saying that they're going to negotiate a Canada deal with the US to be the 51st state. I mean, we are in trouble. And if we don't have leaders, and I don't care who they are, I don't think Jagmeet has enough strength. He's shown himself to try to two-track it too much with the Liberals, and whether he's, he had that moment in the Sun last Monday or 2 Mondays ago when the media and the world said to him, "Are you going to non-confidence this Trudeau government and cause an election?" And he said, "Trudeau has to go, but we'll see. All options are on the table." And even the media were like, what kind of an answer is that, right? Can't have it both ways. So I think Jagmeet has lost his moment as an alternative. I think that Trudeau better have gone for his long surf in Tofino or his walk in the woods like his dad and figured out, is he doing this or not? Because if he's not, let's get a leadership contest. So maybe Mark Carney, as I alluded to earlier, or Freeland, can actually give people something alternative to vote for, or Poilievre. Now, Poilievre, I would like it if he took a security clearance. I'd feel a lot better about what's going on with him and his campaign and his ties to MAGA in the US. I'm concerned. I think a lot of Canadians should be. Let him make sure that we understand what his values are and where he's coming from. I mean, his first big interview of the new year was with a Canadian who left Canada, who is in the US, and he did a US interview. So it's like, where's the alliance? So how can I trust that somebody who's doing that is going to stand up to Trump? Or are we going to align with a movement in the US that I'm concerned about in terms of rights of women and reproductive rights and rights of minorities and rights of all kinds of people? So, I mean, we're in a concerning time. And I think Canadians are ready for whatever leader is going to say, this is about not Canada first in the sense of being nativist. This is about Canadian unity and about standing up for our values and our economy and our sovereignty. And until we have a leader who can jam that message, we're going to find ourselves in a weakening position against a very focused bully to the south.
Do you think that's what Canadians want? Let's take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes and ask Laura Babcock that question. Is that what Canadians actually want? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm chatting tonight with Laura Babcock. She runs a communications crisis management company. She's politically active, not partisan, but from a commentating point. She has her own podcast, The O Show. She's been involved in news, working with the CBC. She's also been involved in business, working with the Oakville Chamber of Commerce. Laura, just take a step back for a second. You haven't been partisan, but you've been very politically active and a real commentator on what's going on in Canada and across the GTA, and involved in business, etc. How do you manage that, being so involved politically and so interested in civic affairs, but not get partisan?
Well, it's values driven, right? So I think, like any good business, I've had mine for over 25 years. My clients know my values, and the companies that I work with most successfully are ones who know their values. And so we base any crisis response, any training with their employees, or any training with the executive suite, we focus it on values. Let's work on your values. Let's amplify them. Let's make sure that they're clear and the consumer, the target audience, understands them and appreciates them, right? So I can approach politics from a values-based perspective. Occasionally, do I lose friends who are politicians who thought I was a super fan and realized that actually, no, I'm an equal opportunity critic? Sure, but I couldn't care less, because I care more about my values. I care more about my community, my country, my world, the future for my children, than I care about any particular political future or, politician or party. I guess perhaps you called me a young lady off the top, and I deeply appreciate that. It made my day, Brian. But in reality, I've been in this game a little while, and I understand that all of that is very transient, and in fact very it's not based on politics. Come and go, politicians come and go, parties come and go. And what doesn't come and go are values, right? So the conversation we had before the break about Canadian unity and sovereignty and what do Canadians want? What Canadians want is what we've always wanted, which is a strong economy, freedom, the ability to get good health care, the ability to take care of our neighbors if they need it, to live in healthy, safe communities. I mean, these things never change. We want to be decent on the world stage. We want to, where we can, promote a sense of compassion, but also strong values. I mean, so the idea of what Canadians want isn't some mystery. The Canadian identity isn't something that's ethereal and we don't know what it is. We all know what it is. You know what I mean?
Do we really know what the Canadian identity is? It seems like the Canadian identity in Quebec versus Ontario versus Western Canada is very different. And have we had someone standing up for what the Canadian identity is, what it means to be Canadian, when it would appear some people, including the celebrity that you spoke about, are willing to consider some sort of union with the United States and are willing to give up on Canadian identity. Do we have an identity?
Yeah, I would argue in that particular case, that person was long gone to U.S. showboating. So, and that's why I was concerned when Polyev decided to do U.S. showboating instead of a serious conversation with Canadians. That being said, we do. I mean, I've lived in Quebec. I grew up in Quebec. I was there during one of the referendums, right? I lived in Winnipeg, in Western Canada. I lived in Thompson, Manitoba. I have lived all throughout Southern and Central Ontario. I've lived in Japan, in Europe, and I can tell you that people there's a Canadian brand. There's a Canadian brand. There are differences. Yes, absolutely. Alberta's always been more vertically inclined, I think, in an identity perspective. That range of mountains that runs right through North America, I think, divides. And so I've always found when I'm out in Alberta, I've traveled the country many times. Yes, they're a little bit different, maybe more aligned to some American values. They have a different economy. They're on the, they're an energy economy. You've got the prairies, which again, agri-economy has different concerns. You've got Quebec with all of its cultural differences and all of its, I love all these places, but they are all different. But what unites Canada has always been a sense of, we recognize that we are sitting on one of the largest resource-rich land masses in the world.
But yet our federal government is doing everything it can to stymie development of it.
I don't think that's true. I think that what they're doing is trying to promote sustainable development and new opportunities in the green economy. Now, are they making mistakes? 100%. Did they not, they brought in immigration because they heard during the pandemic from business, so we need more immigration. We need it in our labor market. Then they put in targets that were too ambitious, and they didn't have structures in place, not support structures, social structures, not housing. So, I mean, they epically failed on that front, from my perspective. They destabilized the housing market. And now, I mean, I could go on about homelessness, as you know, for the next 10 hours. They've made serious mistakes. I don't think they're doing everything to stymie the country from succeeding. I think they are taking a different perspective on it. I mean, for all of the nonsense and branding around Bidenomics, the reality is inflation and went down in the U.S. fastest and first. Their employment went way up. They brought jobs back to America with a green energy strategy and their infrastructure build. So, I mean, to me, that's where I don't get partisan. I'm looking at all of it and saying, some of what Poilievre wants to do sounds good to me. Some of it sounds like silly messaging to kind of whip up anger and division. What I want, and this is where I'm nonpartisan. I honestly don't know what Mark Carney's background is politically. I think he's, globalist, liberal, maybe, whatever. He's hanging out with the Liberal Party. Trudeau seems to like him. What I'm more interested in is listening to his economic speeches, which I have done, and listening to how he looks at Canada's role within the global economy and how we build that. Is there something in his platform, if he's running, that is going to say to me, okay, that's common sense. It's not ideologically anti this or ideologically must do that. I'm looking for not a business leader to lead the country, but someone who sure as hell knows the business of leading a country.
Let's talk economy for a couple of minutes here. So you mentioned Biden economics. The inflation rate in the United States is higher than Canada. Canada's inflation rate came down quicker. This whole just-in inflation thing. Inflation was a global thing. It wasn't a Canadian thing. It wasn't an American thing. It was a global thing because almost every country increased deficit spending during the pandemic for obvious reasons, so that we didn't have a Great Depression. The infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, et cetera, led to the strongest economy. The Economist magazine, before the federal election in the United States, said that the U.S. economy was the best economy in the world. The stock market is an all-time high. The U.S. economy is 20% of global GDP, but the U.S. stock market is almost 70% of global stock market. So on every metric, the United States and the Biden administration has done an incredible job, but it didn't get any credit. And too many Americans believe Trump's. So what's going on? People believe Poilievre's just inflation when it's not true. People believe Trump's criticism of Biden economics when it's not true. People believe what they hear on podcasts, not what they're hearing on the news, and not the reality. What's the problem?
That's exactly how I started our conversation, which is to say, Biden did a terrible job communicating. A terrible job. He thought if he just put his, shoulder to the wheel, got through the biggest bipartisan legislation of a U.S. president since, going back 50 years, he thought that it would be enough, that he would just get in there and fix the problems. And he did, but he didn't communicate that he was fixing the problems. And so what happens is not what reality is, it's the perception of reality in 2025. And so Biden had a terrible campaign about what he was actually doing, and all of he thought the metrics that you just listed would support the voters' decision making. And that is a massive mistake. If any politicians think that metrics and facts are going to mean anything, they haven't been paying attention. Poilievre and Trump come up with slogans that can't be backed up in fact, that didn't even build the wall. He never built the bloody wall, but no one held that to him, right? Axe the tax. I mean, give me a break. What's the policy that's going to replace that, that's going to both protect? I mean, we got a huge forest fire season. We got every Canadian knows that our ecology, that our climate is a huge cost. Try to get insurance on houses. I talked to an insurance expert, and they said, Canadians with these floods in Toronto and Mississauga and these building up on floodplains and all this nonsense is causing us, it's going to cost us a fortune to live in this country just because of environmental factors. So what's Poilievre's plan for that? If he doesn't like the carbon tax, then what is it? Give me an alternative that I can believe you're seeing the big picture. So Biden did a great job. Copy those things, but he didn't do a good job in communicating. So Trump used those years very astutely to completely conquer the public zeitgeist. He moved the Overton window from any kind of news-based, fact-based to fake news and sloganeering and propaganda. It's a case study in propaganda. And I've always respected Trump on that point alone. Nobody has ever done it better than he has. He has no morals or ethics, and he's incredibly effective at redundancy. And
Okay,
at
so
being
let's talk about Canada. So, the news shows this past weekend had statistics on debt as a percentage of GDP, over 6% in the United States, debt as a percentage of GDP. France, Japan, the UK, Germany, all over 4% of GDP debt. Canada, our debt is less than 2% of GDP. We're less than 1/3 our debt as a percentage of GDP than the United States. And yet we have this perception that our federal government and our spending is out of control. Our debt is out of control, that we've got this massive problem. We're 2/3 better off than the United States. What's going on?
We're being lied to, right? So I mean, David Frum said, "Watch out," And I don't want. Maybe I'll have David on the show. I don't want to paraphrase David because he has a lot of commentary on this stuff. But here's the reality: is that if I want to run against an incumbent, I'm going to take all of those metrics and economic factors and global brand points, and I'm going to say none of that is true because you don't like how life feels post-pandemic because things are more expensive. You can't get groceries or eggs for the same price. Blame that all on that guy. Decades of poor decision-making around housing stock going back all kinds of political parties. Blame it all on the current guy. And sow division and sow a lack of Canadian unity. Like I said, I've traveled across this country recently. We're different, but we're still Canadian. I still know when I'm in Canada, not the US, So this idea that we don't understand our Canadian identity, we haven't got one, we need to sell out to the US. When Tucker Carlson talked about daddy coming home and how the US needed daddy, I mean, it almost feels like there's some of that nonsense happening in Canada. Like, oh, please come save us, America. We suck. We don't understand ourselves. We don't have any unity anymore. Our economy's in the toilet. It's all garbage. It's garbage to get Canadians to feel unstabilized and fear-based. And guess what? Populist
But Laura, no one's saying what you're saying. No one's out there.
I say it on the O Show every week. I'm doing I know a spoiler alert, but by the time your audience hears this, I'll be part of another product that is going to be talking powerfully about the reality in this country. The fact is, people don't consume facts anymore. We have a narrative bias, so storytelling is more important than facts, which is why I'm good at what I do, because I tell good stories. It's PR, and Trump's good at storytelling, right? He's good at creating these beliefs about, these caravans of people that never existed, all this stuff. He creates stories and people, a story. We have a narrative bias. We also have a bias where we want to believe our own beliefs, right? So what we do is we say to ourselves, rather than tune into terrestrial radio or 6 o'clock news or destination viewing, whatever, we can now follow whatever we want, get information from whatever source we want, and then the algorithms are going to promote that. So if I decide that I want to listen to, a podcast on this topic, and it has a certain perspective to it, the algorithms are going to drive me towards more of that. And suddenly I'm in a confirmation bias situation where I'm only getting what I believe. So I have watched
10 times as many people are listening to Rogan's podcast as CNN, Fox, and MSNBC altogether. 10 times.
I get some of my clips from the O Show get hundreds of thousands of views in a Canadian market. Okay. So if I have a guest on, like I've had Kathleen Wynne, Charlie Angus, whoever I have on, and I put out a salty 15-second clip from the show, it can, like, some of them are up 300,000 views. So tell me a show in Canada that gets, there are other podcasts that do as well. To your point, new media is where the eyeballs are and the ears are. Tell me a normal mainstream media that gets that kind of traction, right? I do mainstream media. I still do a number of mainstream media. Those shows never get the kind of engagement that I get from doing new media shows, both online and people that I see and hear, because we are moving to a new media. And there might still be the desire to hang on to, legacy media, but that's not where consumer habits are. So where legacy media has a role now is to say, how do we make our information, our important journalism, our resource journalism, which is declining, of course, because of corporate interests, how do we make that relevant, fast, micro produced? How do we turn that into short videos? How do we work across all the platforms? Nobody's tuning in at 6 o'clock to the news, right? So
what about to AM radio at 6 o'clock?
well, you know what? I wish they were. I wish you had the huge numbers that we used to have back in the day. You know, Hamilton's big radio station shut down in the past year. It was like the place to get news in Hamilton for 100 years or whatever, a long time. They shut down. You know, I still do morning radio on 1010. I'll be on, you know, I do Monday mornings at 7:45. There's still a role for terrestrial radio. There's still a role for legacy media, but it isn't the role it was 5 years ago. And they can see that. I mean, if you look at advertising trends going on in terms of public relation and marketing in 2025, they're moving towards social. They're moving towards social, towards micro video. I'm working with clients to create podcasts for their companies right now. I mean, it's changing because look at it this way. We grew up, I don't know how old you are, but when I was young, there was like 5 channels, you know? And so we were all stuck. There was a huge audience for whatever show was on, and we all watched, you know, the Dukes of Hazzard and whatever at the same time. I mean, we had limits. If you had told us back then, wouldn't it be great to have the TV in your hand all day long? You could watch anything you wanted, anywhere you wanted. As you know, you could watch it in short little bites. You could do 5 other things at the same time. Nobody's making you go anywhere, do anything at their pace. It's completely at your pace. We would say that sounds incredible, amazing, and impossible, but that's where we are. So businesses and advertisers and legacy media have to realize it's not about you. It's not about what you want it to be like. It's about how consumers are consuming news and information. And so politicians who understand that are exploiting that by giving quick bites, fast storytelling, redundant messaging, 3-word slogans. They're pounding the crap out of it until it becomes part of the consciousness. People start to believe it to be truth. They don't have the time to fact check. They don't have the time for long, you know, do a deep read. Where'd you get that from? Let me check the sources. Who benefits? They don't do critical thinking. They say, this is what I think I believe, and it sounds good to me, and I want more. And then the algorithms generate that. So you know, I wish it wasn't this way. In some ways, I love social media because it deconstructs power hierarchies that allows for more social justice in many ways. But I also see the tremendous damage that it does to people's understanding of a shared reality and fact. So all the stuff that you went to Harvard, you focus on the fact that, you know, there are all these metrics, there's reality, there's truth. Why don't people believe it? Well, because nobody is to your point, messaging singularly that conversation. They're not saying Canada is, you know, doing great. The country has never been in a better position for growth, given our resources and our strategies for sustainable whatever. Nobody's doing that, right? You got the Trudeau government constantly trying to catch up to policy misses and mistakes. You've got Poilievre flooding the zone with a bunch of short form nonsensical stuff, and if you listen to the Peterson interview, you're left at the end of it going, what the hell does this guy stand for? I think he was trying. I think he's got a tiger by the tail. I don't think Poilievre truly understands what he's even doing. And then you've got the NDP that seem kind of out of the mix. You've got the Liberals provincially, whose campaign, they might have raised some money lately, but their online stuff has been terrible. You got Merritt and the NDP swinging for the fences, but still don't understand their guardrails. You got Ford with a communication juggernaut, but I would argue very poor performance. And so you're looking at it and you're saying to yourself, are we going to have good leaders who can also be good communicators, or are we going to be stuck with bad leaders who can communicate well? And that to me is where this goes from tumultuous and transformative to crisis. I don't want bad leaders with bad policies that, you know, only profit certain parts of the population and not the rest of us. I want to have good leaders with good communication skills who can tell us the truth about how we are doing, good or bad.
But it sounds to me like you think that communication trumps all. And
yes, obviously,
so
you just use the word. The most powerful man in the world and the richest man in the world are both communication juggernauts. I mean, it does trump all, the word Trump right in there. So you might not like it, but we are a social species. And communication is how we get our information and make our decisions. So
So facts don't matter. Trump and communication is what is the key.
Facts matter if you know how to tell a story about those facts that is compelling and repetitive and responsive and engaging. They don't matter on paper. And people can sit around and say that they don't have any money for anything. And then I'll go down and I'll work with people who don't have anything at all, except what's in their shopping cart. And it's like, you have a lot. This is a free country at this moment. You have endless opportunity and supports. Yes, we pay a lot of taxes, but we also have a pretty good country. If you've traveled the world, we're doing very well. So are there things I'm critical of? Do I hate seeing my neighbors in tents? Do I think that that is absolutely shameful and deplorable in a country like Canada with all of our money, that anyone should suffer in homelessness? 100%. And I can go on for an hour about why every level of government has a role and a responsibility in that mess and what they need to do about it. The reality is, facts are important, and because they influence our lives, they influence how we live and breathe. We need to have facts and reality. But if you can't communicate them in the current communication space, they don't. So do they matter empirically? Yes. Do they matter in practice? Not if you're not communicating them.
We got to take a break. Fascinating conversation with Laura Babcock. Laura, before we go for break, tell us, if people want to watch your show, how do they access it?
Yeah, so if you want to watch The O Show, go to YouTube. It's The O Show with Laura Babcock, or you can hear it on Apple, Spotify, wherever. It's both an audio and a visual podcast. And my company is powergroup.ca, Power Group Communications. That's how you can find me.
Back in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We got Laura Babcock with us tonight from The O Show. Laura, you said you grew up in Quebec, and you were there during the referendum. Right now, if the polls are right, the Conservatives would have a majority government federally, and the official opposition would be a very strong, sizable Bloc Québécois. In addition, it looks like the Parti Québécois is in a strong position to take over government in Quebec. Are we headed for another referendum? And when you talk about Canadian unity and having to be strong and unified across the country in opposition to the United States and what Donald Trump is doing, how do you feel about what's happening or what could happen in a upcoming both federal as well as provincial election that would put separatists in charge?
That's an interesting question. There's also, let's not forget about what are they calling it? Alberta exit. It's not, they've got there's an Alberta version of Brexit that's always being thrown around as well. I'm concerned. I'm concerned of Canada being destabilized. We've got tremendous pressure from the South acting like a giant vacuum. And that might try to pull an Alberta separation to join the US, worst case scenario. What does it look like for Quebec separatists? I mean, I grew up in the days of René Lévesque. As I mentioned, I have the PTSD from that referendum. I remember the stickers in my sticker album as a young girl were vote non. So, I mean, I remember it well. And then the second referendum, you had Chrétien, who did a lot of stuff to keep Quebec in Canada. But Chrétien, I think, was seen at the time and certainly rewarded in terms of his longevity as a prime minister for his sense of Canadian unity. Like, Chrétien was like, we are Canadians, right? And he was very forceful as a leader, whether you liked his politics or not. We can't deny that we had a clear-minded, forceful leader. I mean, he kept us out of the Iraq War. Chrétien took no prisoners. You remember the Shawinigan handshake? I'm just saying that there have been times. I'll even say Brian Mulroney had a clear sense with Mulroney what Canada was all about. Some of the stuff he did internationally made Canadians feel proud with the apartheid in South Africa and what he did around the acid rain. I mean, we've had prime ministers that managed those different elements, right? The Quebec cultural differences and desire for separation. The differences out west have always been there. We've had prime ministers who, not perfect, but have been strong symbols of what Canada is in the fight for. And I think that's where my concern is with Poilievre. What I hear from Poilievre are a lot of Canadian MAGA kind of nativist stuff. And I don't hear this sense of a strong Canada, both internally and externally, and our values being protected and promoted. We got that. Again, Mulroney made mistakes. Chrétien made mistakes. Trudeau, I think in the early years, was quite strong with that. I think that there was a sense globally and within Canada, especially in the early days of the pandemic, that we had a prime minister that could bring us together. And then, of course, vaccine mandates came and everything went bananas. But leadership matters, because a good leader is essentially a communication vessel. A good leader is both a decision-making person who hopefully, runs on values, but also communicates. During those early days of the pandemic, you remember, I as a business person was swamped. I don't think I left my desk for 2 years because of crisis management communication, but we remember watching every day to see what Trudeau would say. What is our country going to do? How are you going to help us? His line was, we're going to get through this together. So he was capable early on of that kind of national voice. So I am concerned about separatists. I'm concerned about the Bloc having too much power. I'm concerned. But I think the solution to those concerns is strong leadership and communication. And that's, a good leader. I don't vote for people based on party. I vote for the leader based on values. If I see a consistent communication around values and it applies, because let's face it, Poilievre can come up with a great policy platform. So could, Trudeau or whoever replaces him. So could Jagmeet or whoever might, if he's in jeopardy. That platform is only going to last as long as the values of the leader drive it, because crisis comes. So it doesn't matter what your plans were when a pandemic drops. It depends on the values of the leader.
You've talked about values quite a bit, and I appreciate that. Two of the values you spoke about were democracy and reproductive rights. Kamala Harris talked about both those incessantly. And it didn't resonate with the American electorate. They seem to care only about pocketbook issues.
They always have. It's the economy, stupid. Carville said it 30 years ago, and he said it every single day of the last 5 years. It's the same thing in Canada. I've said on this podcast, I care deeply about the economy. I want my kids to go to university. I want them to be able to buy a first home. I want my neighbors to be off the street and not living in freaking tents. The economy is number one. It always has been, always will be. But you can do the economy with a set of values that doesn't just give money to corporate CEOs and to corporate tax breaks, but instead works for the good of the middle class. I didn't appreciate the value of unions for a very long time. I sure do now, because they created the middle class, and union people are actually the brand of unions is shot way up in the last couple of years, because people are, and I'm not talking about private unions, I'm talking about public unions, because in spite of the attacks they might get from a certain premier or a certain whatever, people are saying, hey, I am now finding that I'm no longer middle class. I'm sliding into this lower class I didn't think was possible. What is happening? Well, look at what was in the first 9 hours of this year, Brian? The CEOs in this country had already made the Canadian wage. What is up with that? There is an incredible disparity in wealth. And interestingly, Poilievre spoke to it in his Peterson interview, but his conclusion on how to fix it, I think was devastatingly dangerous. But the wealth inequality in this country, we don't have a lack of money. We have a lack of satiation of the greed of the wealthy. We can share a little bit more, have policies that are more long-term thinking, that say, unless you want to live in a gated community, how about you make sure you invest in leaders who invest in your neighbors, so we can have safe, healthy, productive, successful communities. I want to make money. I like to travel the world. I like to drive a nice car. I don't want to be in a situation where I get and get and get, and my neighbors get poorer and poorer and poorer. So, I think that's a Canadian value. And I bring up values because values drive everything. They drive how we run our businesses. They drive how we respond to crisis. They drive how we invest. They drive how we do our budgets. See what a person values, look at their budget. What are you spending the money on? And then look at their time. What are you spending your time on? So the point in all of this is values-driven leadership, authentic leadership, highly communicative leadership is very, very appealing. We've seen that in terms of what people want from their companies, where they buy products. We've seen that from, why do people resonate with Trump? Because he seems authentic. Now, Is he? He's authentically mercurial and authentically bombastic and authentically thin-skinned, but people are like, yeah, this guy's for real. He's real. They buy the con because he seems authentic. So, I mean, it doesn't kind of, policy is important, but what's important is, do we have a leader who can say Canada is true north, strong and free, and we will remain so. Canada has problems and we need to fix them, and here's how we're going to do it together.
If Justin Trudeau called you up today and asked you for some advice, what would you say?
You know what? I've given him tons of free advice on News Talk 1010 and every platform I do for the last 9 years. I don't work for politicians because I want to be able to stay free to do podcasts like this. I think it's important. My advice is clear. At this point, get the hell out of the way. I said it in June when Biden had his terrible debate performance. I actually tweeted, the tweet stood up well. I said, I hope Trudeau doesn't pull a Biden. Because you remember Trudeau said a year ago that he would check his numbers by June of this past year. And there'd have to be some marked improvement. And then he did nothing. And he didn't get the improvement, right? So then what? So now we're in a Biden situation where you don't want to leave because you think you're the only one who can do it and save Canada.
Well, Biden may have been right.
What's that? No, she lost by 1%. It was a sweep in terms of Trump's appeal across all the country, but not in terms of numbers, right? It wasn't a rout. It was a 1% difference. Now, had Biden gotten out at the midterms and given any candidate an actual race with the bench that the Democrats had, Gavin Newsom, why couldn't he be up there trying to fight for the spot? Biden waited so long that the only possible replacement was his vice president.
Okay, so does Trudeau give any potential leadership aspirant enough time? We've seen that Kamala Harris did not have enough time, but Doug Ford, with very little time, did have enough time to win Ontario.
Yeah, but there was a lot of factors going on there, right? We saw Patrick Brown and all that chaos that happened, and people were kind of like, and we'd known the Ford brand; he'd been around a long time. I mean, we can dissect the last two provincial elections if you want, but I don't see it as quite the same. I mean, Freeland has visibility, but she's got visibility of number 2, right? Finance minister, deputy, she's number 2. She has not got visibility as the primary, just like Kamala Harris didn't. So Kamala didn't have enough runway to really have the American people get to know her. And your point about she focused on democracy and nobody cared, a lot of people cared, but not as much as they cared about the price of eggs, obviously. So economy first, democracy protecting it. That's more of an esoteric conversation. Not everybody can dive in and understand the risk to current democracy and the liberal world order, right? But they understand what it costs at the grocery store. So Trudeau's got to get out of the way. He's got to get out of the way. Let them have a leadership contest. Let Canadians have a chance to test the Liberal bench and decide whether or not any of them are up to the task. And if they're not, they're going to vote Poilievre, right? But the longer Trudeau plays this game of cutesy, where he's like doing this kind of interview, but not doing this, showing up at parties and making speeches to the faithful, but not talking to Canadians, people are sick of it. So he's got to get out of the way and give the Canadian public a chance to look at somebody else as a possible person to vote for. That's the only thing he can do at this stage.
Some people tell me that they're worried that Mark Carney might be like a Michael Ignatieff, just visiting, too intellectual, globalist, etc.
So here's some free advice to Mark Carney, if he chooses to have it. Do better videos. Your communication sucks. I've watched his videos and I feel like they're a corporate video I would have shot for somebody in the 90s. Right? He is good at communicating to his prime audience, economists, people, bankers, the corporate Canada vote he might be able to get because he's good at that. Is he good at communicating to the people I go to parties with on the weekend who are not elites and they don't buy, they hate Trudeau? And, is Carney going to be able to say to them, I'll put more money in your pocket, I'll let you feel more free? I don't know if he can make that message, but he's going to have to, because Canadians want to be true north, strong and free. Strong economy, free, keep our democracy, right? True to our values. Give us some of that sugar. I don't know if Carney can deliver the sugar. I certainly don't think that Freeland can. Maybe there's somebody else.
People think that letter she sent on that Monday morning was incredibly good communications.
Oh, it was great for her purpose in that moment, which was to throw a fireball at Trudeau because he deserved it. Was it good communication to rally the country behind her as the next prime minister? I don't think so, because I think people looked at that letter and thought, damn, makes a lot of points, but We also thought we were going to get an economic update. We really needed it as a country. We didn't need this kind of drama. So while I thought as a comms person, ooh, how spicy and fantastic, and she made her points and people know she's upset with Trudeau's handling of the economy and where she stands on this and that, I also looked at it and I thought there's going to be a backlash. And the fact that her publisher moved up the release of her book makes it look like it was done for dramatic, or other purposes. I don't think that it resonated as a serious, I'm going to do this economic statement, and or let us know on the Friday when obviously their conversation happened. That drama of having us all waiting for the economic statement and then having this letter go out, it was high drama. It reminded me of Belinda Stronach crossing the floor on that stormy night in Ottawa. But I don't think that necessarily set the stage for her with a lot of Canadians to be seen as someone who will be, out of the Trudeau drama years and into fixing the economy. I just don't. I think it played into this idea that there's a lot of chaos in Trudeau's cabinet. So I think there were other ways she could have done that if she wants to be prime minister. If she just wanted to fire, a shot across the bow, highly effective. If she wanted to position herself to be the leader of this country, I think she could have put in messaging that was much more about unifying and stabilizing the country. And, I would have put in more, I would have had her campaign ready to go. And in that letter that got all the eyeballs, then do a letter for the sake of that moment. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't think it was as strategic as it needed to be if she wants to be the prime minister.
Last question. You said that Trudeau going down to Mar-a-Lago was a mistake because it showed that he was subservient. He's invited to the inauguration. Should he go?
Yes, he should go as a head of state. He should go to the inauguration. Now, should Danielle Smith be talking about the tickets she's got? No, she's a premier. But yeah, I think a head of a state should go. At this point, the U.S. public in a free and fair election elected Donald Trump. I think it's a terrible mistake and one that we will rue as a world. And I'm not excited about the next however many years. But I think Trudeau should go because, you have to stand up to a bully. You don't hide. You don't run down to their private club and be sycophantic, but you also don't hide from the big moments. So no, he should go. He should be a head of state while he still is the head of state. You have to flex your sovereignty. You have to be at the big game. You can't just hide and play petty politics. And that's my point about Freeland's letter. It was powerful and good honor. Everything in there, I think she was right to say, but it wasn't focused on a future campaign audience. And I think that was the big miss because I don't think she's going to get that kind of attention again.
Laura Babcock, thanks so much. This has been a great review of the past, of communications, of political strategies, and some warnings for 2025. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. And all my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com, as well as on YouTube. And I'm also on all those podcast servers that Laura talked about earlier. Stay with us, everyone, every Monday through Friday, 6 o'clock.